The NFL draft is always so unpredictable. There's countless of mock drafts leading up to the process, but until you actually get into the day in round 1, then day 2 and 3, and then finally on day 3 through rounds 4 to 7, you really don't know what to fully expect. But in this 2025 NFL draft, we witnessed the biggest draft slide in NFL history with Shedeur Sanders, quarterback from Colorado. And we know the background, the story of Shedeur being son of head coach Deion Sanders, the process throughout it all, what he was able to do with Coach Prime in Jackson State and Colorado in terms of helping build a culture with him, along with Travis Hunter, who was a second overall pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars, who will thrive certainly at a high level, doing an unprecedented thing, playing both sides of the football. Shedeur Sanders expected to see his name called early, if not day 1, day 2, even though it being a weaker quarterback class compared to other years. Being picked at 144 in round 5, I know no one expected that. And I'm not going to get into certain conversations, whether some people think it's about race or things of that nature. We're just going to talk about the reality of the conversation, and we're not going to be too long in this video, to be honest. And if you're new to the channel, also stay tuned for my biggest takeaways from the NFL draft video that I will be dropping later this week. Stay tuned for that. But I think it's really time to analyze this situation of why we think Shedeur Sanders slid so far, and really the opportunity that it presents for Shedeur, because yes, this is not ideal. He would have made way more money if he was drafted in the first round. Obviously, money has never been a concern for Shedeur Sanders, so that's a different conversation in itself. But still, even with that, you want to make as much money as possible. But throughout it all, people say it's a humbling situation. Really, it's a presentable situation in terms of he can present himself as a starter for the Cleveland Browns. Yes, they drafted Dillon Gabriel before him, which is very much a Cleveland Browns move, and no offense to Browns fans who are probably watching this video, but I'm sure y'all know what I mean by that. A quarterback room now of Joe Flacco, Kenny Pickett, Dillon Gabriel, Shedeur Sanders, and Deshaun Watson. Obviously, he's not going to be playing though, and I'm pretty sure we've seen Deshaun Watson's last game as a Cleveland Brown. It's still very perplexing, but I think it's safe to say that there's no consistent or favorite starter for the Cleveland Browns at quarterback position right now, despite Joe Flacco's success a couple years ago with the Browns, because we saw the type of season that he had with the Colts last year, very up and down. So that job is still very much so up for the taking, and I think Shedeur has a great opportunity to make his name heard and really prove the haters wrong. But before we dive a little bit deeper into this video, make sure you hit the like button and subscribe and turn on post notifications. You know we post about here videos about the NBA, NFL, Marvel, DC, pop culture, all things of that nature. Follow me on Instagram at Swaggyverse and on TikTok at Swaggyverse02 for cooking videos, shorts, reels, all types of content and things of that nature. And with that being said, let's talk about the biggest draft slide in NFL history. So this is a very interesting thing in terms of looking at Shedeur as a prospect, his tape, and things overall like that. Now we can safely say this: Shedeur Sanders was one of the best quarterbacks in college football. I know it didn't lead to necessarily the most success, particularly in year 1 with Colorado, but in year 2, yes, Colorado made a reasonable jump in wins. They won 4 games in 2023 and upped that by 5 games, winning 9 games in 2024. So that was very favorable for Shedeur Sanders, and even beyond that, he had some good seasons in Colorado. In terms of statistics, this past season in 2024, in his final season, he led the whole country in completion percentage, completing 74% of his passes, threw for 37 touchdowns and only 10 interceptions, a really good touchdown to interception ratio, throwing for over 4,100 passing yards and a quarterback rating of 168. So statistically, he had a really good season, and I think it's pretty obvious. Shedeur Sanders, he isn't the biggest quarterback. He's not your Josh Allen. He's not your Lamar Jackson in terms of an athlete, things of that nature. He's not the dual threat quarterback that people are ideally looking for nowadays. He's not Cam Ward, even though that I think that both of those two quarterback prospects had the potential to be the best quarterbacks from this 2025 draft when it's all said and done. But Shedeur, he's 6'1", 216. Nothing too crazy about his physical frame. He isn't the swollest, he isn't the strongest, but he's a definition of a point guard at the quarterback position. And I think there's a couple of things to really take away, because that's breaking down some of the on-field stuff, but off the field wise, people have had conversations in terms of, you know, the NFL teams trying to make an example of him, or really teams not liking his dad. Again, he's too cocky. Reports have been that he sandbagged interviews intentionally to teams that he didn't want to get drafted to, or things like that. The reality is, in terms of the interview aspect, we will never know that. In terms of teams coming together to intentionally let him slide like that, we won't actually know unless people admit it in the future like that. What we do know though is that thanks to the Cleveland Browns, thanks to GM Andrew Berry, thanks to Cleveland Browns head coach Kevin Stefanski, that Shedeur has an opportunity to do something great and prove a lot of people wrong. Now, I can't attest for the people like Saints fans who are mad that they picked Tyler Shuck over Shedeur in round 2. Not gonna lie, I wouldn't have done that either, especially looking at this throw that he had from the combine. And there's more to that. Obviously, Tyler Shuck, he had a solid season last year. Yes, he's older as a quarterback, but I'm not gonna lie, I wouldn't have picked him over Shedeur. I had it like around a round 3 grade on Tyler Shuck. Even a Jackson Dart to an extent. Yes, he has the talent and things of that nature, and for sure, I'm sure Giants head coach Brian Daboll liked the type of player that he was, and there's connections from the New York Giants to the Ole Miss coaching staff. But I'm not even sure that Jackson Dart is really a better quarterback prospect than Shedeur Sanders, but it's all subjective. That's what we have to remember in this argument. So despite people feeling like Shedeur shouldn't have slipped to 144 in round 5, ultimately it's a team's choice to make. If he wasn't high on their draft board, then that's just the reality of the situation. I did mention earlier that this was a weaker quarterback draft class, and rightfully so. I mean, we saw in 2024, 6 quarterbacks taken in the first round. We saw Bryce Young, CJ Stroud, Anthony Richardson, among others, taken in the first round of the 2023 draft. I will say that this 2025 draft was a little bit stronger than the 22 draft in terms of quarterback prospects, but it wasn't that much better. I will say that for sure. And some people genuinely probably thought that Shedeur was not all of that. And in combination with that, with some people already thinking maybe he wasn't a round 1 talent, but maybe was around 2 to 3 or something like that. If you combine that with the fact that the interviews may have not gone well with some teams and things like that, then it just gets worse. And honestly, it makes sense why this did happen. And by no means am I saying that this should have happened, that he should have failed this far in the draft, but there's just a lot of tension behind it, and some teams didn't want to deal with that. And I will say though, I'm sure y'all have all seen the prank call that the Falcons defensive coordinator's son, Jax Ulbrich, called and intentionally did on draft day.
Hey, is this Shedeur? Hey, this is Mickey Loomis here, the GM of the New Orleans Saints. Good, how are you, man?
Good, been waiting on you.
Yeah, we have. We're gonna take you with our next pick right here, man. Hey, but you're gonna have to wait a little bit longer, man.
Yeah, that's very messed up, and it's just gonna point out a lot of views. I mean, I know the conversation on this week's sports shows like a First Take or shows on Fox Sports, things of that nature, are gonna be talking about how Stephen A. Smith will probably say something like this is like the equivalent to a Colin Kaepernick or not trying to let him get into the league, things of that nature. I wouldn't go that far. Like I said before, I'm not gonna make it a racist type of thing because it really isn't. I just think that it's a very unprecedented thing, and ultimately, guys, we're not the GMs, we're not the owners, we're not the scouts, we're not the coaches, we're not the people that are in these war rooms on draft day leading up to the draft process or at these guys' pro days, things like that, to make those decisions. So it's their right to make that investment, and if they don't think that a player is worth that pick or worth that compensation, or they simply just don't want them on the team or view them as a fit, then that's their decision to make, and that's for Shedeur Sanders to prove them wrong. And that's really the most intriguing aspect of what this situation can present for Shedeur Sanders. Like the Browns GM Andrew Berry said, go in there and put in work, and that's the best advice and words of advice for Shedeur Sanders. It's not about the flashiness, it's not about the wristwatch celebration, it's not about all the things that he was able to create at Colorado. It's time to show why he was projected to be a first round, second round graded quarterback in this year's draft. And like I mentioned those quarterbacks earlier in the quarterback room of the Cleveland Browns, I definitely think this job is very winnable for Shedeur Sanders. Since the whole situation has came down to it, I've really compared the situation to when Russell Wilson was drafted to the Seahawks back in 2012. Russell Wilson was drafted in the 3rd round of the 2012 NFL draft, and they had recently signed Matt Flynn to a 3-year, $26 million deal back then. And Matt Flynn was the expected starter, but at training camp, Russell Wilson frankly outplayed him and impressed head coach Pete Carroll and the coaching staff so much that he won the job over Matt Flynn, who had that contract. Why am I comparing Shedeur Sanders to Russell Wilson from this situation? It's because if you outplay the rest of the quarterback room in training camp and OTAs and things of that nature, they're not going to be able to deny you, because first and foremost, the Cleveland Browns, they are the definition of quarterback purgatory. Let's just be honest. Since the year 2000, 25 years ago, there have been 40 different starting quarterbacks for the Cleveland Browns. That says enough in itself right there, that they have had no stability at that position. And yes, while a player like Dylan Gabriel, he did finish 4th in the Heisman this past year at Oregon, he also turns 25 in December, so he's a year and a half older than Shedeur Sanders. And I think in terms of an upside standpoint, I think Shedeur Sanders, he can win that job over him. Joe Flacco is 40 years old. Kenny Pickett struggled when he started for the Steelers. He was obviously a backup for the Eagles last year, even though they did win a Super Bowl, but let's be real, I mean, that wasn't because of him. So Shedeur has what it takes, I think, to win this job. If you look at his tape, he's great in the intermediate passing game. A lot of people try to knock him about the deep ball, but he has made some deep throws at times, but he takes what the defense gives him. And I think that Shedeur Sanders can thrive with the Browns, who really had, I think, one of the better drafts this year. Obviously in the first round they drafted Mason Graham, Carson Schlesinger, who I think is an absolute steal, who they got in the 2nd round to pair with Mason Graham at the linebacker position. But I really like what they did at the running back position, drafting a guy like Quinshon Judkins from Ohio State, who had a huge year this past season, a part of that national championship team. They also drafted running back Dylan Sampson from Tennessee, who was a really productive running back for the Volunteers. Them double dipping at running back really will help the run game and play action, as Kevin Stefanski's offense really thrives off of the play action, and they still have a piece like a Jerry Jeudy, who had a really good year in his first season with the Cleveland Browns last year. So there's certainly some building blocks there, and I think Shedeur could be the quarterback of the future for the Browns. And we all know that he for sure has a chip on his shoulder slipping like this. He's expected to be picked way earlier, and even though this is the biggest draft slide in NFL history, this is just the beginning of the story, because it can turn into something unexpected to something even better. And I think that's the reality for Shedeur Sanders, because this is the card that he has been dealt. Yes, obviously he didn't come from the hardest life. His dad was one of the greatest NFL players of all time, for better or worse. Some people hate that and don't like how he comes off, but he can show why he's put in this position for a reason. And I think that he can be a really good quarterback at the NFL level and can be the quarterback of the future for the Cleveland Browns and help them win games at a solid rate. But yeah, guys, let me know what y'all think in the comments down below. How shocking was Shedeur's draft slide to y'all? I think it's one of the most unprecedented things in NFL history that I've seen from a draft draft standpoint and just really in sports in general now. Like I said, it's on Shedeur Sanders to prove himself right, to prove all the teams that pass on him wrong, and shoot, quite frankly, the Cleveland Browns wrong too, because I believe they picked him 5 times before picking him and picked a quarterback before him too, and as well, and Dylan Gabriel. So for Shedeur Sanders, man, just go put in the work. You can beat every single one of these quarterbacks in that quarterback room. Let's just be honest. I think that everyone sees that as a reality, and it might be an inevitable thing. And I think he'll also have the support of the fans too. So in all those combination factors, I think that Shedeur starting for the Browns is imminent, and I think that he can be really successful at the next level. I'm not saying that he will be a top 5 quarterback, one of the greatest of all time, but I certainly think that he can be a really good quarterback in this league and be a quarterback that you can win with if you put him in the right positions to be successful. But y'all let me know in the comments down below what y'all thought of Shedeur's draft slide to the 5th round. I appreciate you guys watching. Always make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and turn on post notifications. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter at SwaggyRuss, on TikTok at SwaggyRuss02 for all types of sports content, stuff about pop culture, things of that nature as well too. A lot more videos on the way, like I said earlier. Stay tuned for my essentially NFL draft recap video, the biggest takeaways from the NFL draft, coming sometime this week. Really gonna analyze every single team because there was a lot of good teams, I'm not gonna lie, that had some good draft picks, and I know it's just a draft right now. Really, you can't grade until the season starts and things of that nature, and also after each player's production, after season 1, season 2, and stuff like that. But in terms of a draft standpoint and just recapping it from that type of lens, we're gonna break that down for sure. Talk as well about the biggest winners from this year's NFL draft, so stay tuned for that. Love y'all guys. Y'all be blessed. Stay tuned for more videos. Like I said, know that you matter. God has so many great things for you guys, and you're here for a reason. If you have breath in your lungs, God has purpose for you, no matter what people say. Jesus loves you guys. Y'all have a good one. Be blessed and know that you matter.